Okay, so uh, last Friday, May 2nd, 2025, it really felt like something shifted in German
It did,
politics.
yeah, a big moment.
Just 4 days, literally 4 days, before a new chancellor was supposed to be sworn in, Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service, the BFV,
The Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz? Yeah.
they took this massive step,
Mm.
officially classifying the entire Alternative for Germany party, the AfD,
As a gesichert rechtsextremistische Bewegung.
which means a confirmed right-wing extremist movement. I mean, wow, this isn't just, another news item. It feels like a major escalation.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge escalation. And to really get why it's such a big deal, you kind of have to look at how we got here.
Right. It wasn't always like
No,
this.
not at all. The BFV started looking at the AfD as a prüffall. That's basically a case under initial review, just checking things out.
Sort of dipping your toes in.
Exactly. Then it moved up to Verdachtsfall, which is a suspected case, more serious.
Okay.
And now, this classification at the federal level, Beobachtungsfall, a case under active observation, it basically aligns the whole party with what was already happening in some states.
Like Saxony, Thuringia, Saxony-Anhalt. Those branches were already classified this way.
Precisely. So now it's nationwide.
Yeah.
And that move, it has potentially serious implications.
Definitely. So for this deep dive, we've pulled together info from, well, quite a few places.
Trying to get the full picture.
Yeah, we're looking at reports from Bild, NTV Deutschland, DW, also statements from Sarah Wagenknecht and Dmitry Medvedev.
And that opinion piece grappling with the bigger picture, too.
Right. So our goal today, for you listening, is to really break down what this classification actually means, the justification the BFE gave for it.
And crucially, what the potential fallout could be for German politics, for society.
Especially when you think about the voters. What is it, 20, maybe up to 27% support the AfD right now?
It's a really significant chunk of the electorate. You can't ignore that.
No way. Okay, so let's start with the BFE's reasoning. What's the core argument here?
Well, the central point, the really key thing in their assessment, is this idea of the Volk, the people.
Mm-hmm.
They argue that AfD's main understanding of who the people are is based on ethnic origin. And crucially, they say that idea is fundamentally incompatible with Germany's free, democratic, basic order.
Okay, so the Grundsätze, the basic law, the core principles.
Exactly. Things like human dignity, rule of law, democracy.
Yeah.
The foundations. The BFV is saying the AfD's ethnic concept of the Volk clashes with those foundations.
So it's not just like a few rogue members saying extreme things. It goes deeper.
That seems to be the argument, yeah. The BFE isn't just pointing to fringe elements. They're assessing this core concept, this idea of the Volk, and saying it inherently aims to exclude certain groups.
To devalue them, stop them from participating equally.
Right, and the focus seems to be particularly on migrants, especially those from Muslim-majority countries. That's the specific concern highlighted.
But hang on, you won't find that specific definition of Volk written down explicitly in their official party program, will you?
No, that's a really important point. It's not laid out like that in the manifesto.
So what's the evidence then? What's the BFE pointing to?
Well, from what we understand, the assessment is built on an accumulation of statements, internal communications, public speeches, comments made by lots of AfD officials over time.
Okay, so a pattern of behavior and rhetoric.
Exactly. And it's not actually a brand new interpretation either. About a year before this federal move, the Higher Administrative Court in Minster, they actually upheld similar reasoning for one of the state-level classifications.
Ah, okay. So there's some legal precedent for this line of argument.
Yes, there's existing legal backing, which definitely strengthens the BFE's position, legally speaking.
That does add weight.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the timing. This announcement comes from the outgoing Interior Minister, Nancy Faeser,
SPD. Yeah.
right before a new government is, well, expected to take office. That feels politically charged, doesn't it?
It certainly raises questions. The NTV Deutschland analysis really digs into this. Apparently, Minister Faeser had this assessment ready for a little while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, reportedly. And the decision to release it right at the end of her term, potentially without full coordination with whoever comes next, well, it inevitably makes people wonder about the political motives behind it.
You can't help but wonder. And it's not just the timing, is it? There are other concerns about the process.
Right, like the fact that this whole assessment was finalized under the previous BFV head, Thomas Haldenwang.
The one who then announced he's running for the Bundestag, for the CDU.
That's the one. I mean, talk about blurring lines. The head of the Domestic Intelligence Agency planning to become a politician for a major party.
Looks awkward, to say the least.
It does. Now, Reportedly, he paused his BFE duties while campaigning, but still, this huge classification was finalized on his watch. It inevitably raises questions about impartiality, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And then there's the fact that the full, detailed report,
Mm-hmm.
the one explaining all the reasoning.
It's not
That's
being
it.
published.
Right. Which just adds another layer of concern about transparency, about accountability. People want to see the full evidence.
Understandably so. When you take such a significant step, you expect the justification to be laid bare.
Okay, so the classification's out there. It's official. How are people reacting? I imagine the AfD isn't happy.
No, not remotely. Their response was pretty immediate and forceful. They called it utter nonsense.
Predictable, I suppose.
And they've already said they're taking legal action. So, yeah, expect a long court battle over this.
Okay. But it's not just the AfD pushing back, right? We're hearing from others, too. Sarah Wagenknecht, for example.
Yeah, Wagenknecht was quite critical. She basically argued it's, well, factually questionable, but also politically a bad idea, counterproductive.
How so?
Her point is that moves like this don't actually persuade AfD voters to change their minds. If anything, she thinks it just alienates them more, makes them angrier, fuels that feeling of being attacked by the establishment.
So it could backfire, in her view.
That's her argument. She says the focus should be on tackling the reasons why people vote AfD in the first place, not just labeling the party.
Interesting perspective. And then there was Dmitry Medvedev.
Ah, yes. His reaction was, typically strong.
You could say that.
He used pretty fiery language, called it ironic that a party polling so well is being labeled extremist and a threat to democracy. He basically framed it as mainstream parties trying to shut down any popular opposition by calling them names.
Okay, standard rhetoric from him, perhaps. But this brings us to something really interesting from that NTV Deutschland analysis.
Right, the effectiveness question.
Exactly. They really question whether this whole strategy, more surveillance, public labeling, actually works. Does it achieve the intended goal?
And they point to places like Thuringia as a kind of case study.
Where Bjorn Höcke is the leader, widely seen as being on the party's far-right fringe, if not beyond.
Right. And in Thuringia, the AfD has been under intense scrutiny, officially observed for years. But what's happened to their support there?
It's actually gone up. Significantly.
Precisely. So NTV asks, could there actually be a link? Is it possible that the increased observation, the constant labeling, is somehow, maybe paradoxically, boosting their support?
Wow. That's counterintuitive, but maybe plausible.
It's a question they argue needs serious thought. Is the strategy itself inadvertently helping the AfD build their narrative, making them seem like martyrs?
Oh, that's a really critical point. And it ties into the concerns from that opinion piece we looked at, too.
Yeah, the piece that wrestles with the big democratic questions.
Right, like how do you handle a party that holds views many find abhorrent, but which also has the support of, say, a quarter of the voters? There's a real tension there, isn't there?
Definitely. A tension between rejecting an ideology and upholding democratic principles, including the right for people to support the party they choose, even if you disagree strongly.
The opinion piece sort of flags this difficult balance.
It does, and it also makes a broader critique, suggesting maybe the current political climate in the EU, this sort of dominant consensus, might be stifling real alternatives.
And that could push people towards parties like the AfD, who position themselves as the only ones challenging the status quo.
That's the implication, yes, that the lack of perceived choice might be feeding the protest vote.
So putting it all together, there's this genuine worry, isn't there, that this classification, however justified the BFE feels it is,
Could actually end up strengthening the AfD.
yeah, by playing right into their narrative, their story of being victims attacked by a political cartel that wants to silence them.
It could absolutely galvanize their base, make them feel even more defiant, more convinced that the AfD is the only true opposition.
And maybe even attract new voters who feel alienated or ignored by the mainstream parties for whatever reason.
It's a very real risk. Framing matters so much in politics, and this allows them to frame themselves as under siege.
And that NTV article ends with a pretty stark look ahead, doesn't it?
It does. It points out the very real possibility of the AfD forming its first state government. In Saxony-Anhalt, maybe even next year.
Which really ramps up the urgency, right? We need to understand why they're gaining strength. Are the current strategies actually working, or are they part of the problem?
It shifts the whole debate, doesn't it? It's not just about classification anymore. It's about understanding the deeper dynamics at play.
Okay, so let's try and summarize what we've unpacked in this deep dive. The big news. Germany's domestic intelligence agency, the BFV, has now officially classified the entire AfD party as a confirmed right-wing extremist movement nationwide.
Right. The justification hinges on their view of the Volk being based on ethnicity, which the BFV says is incompatible with Germany's democratic foundations, particularly concerning the exclusion of migrants.
It's a major step up from previous labels. But this decision, coming right before a government changeover and with questions about the process,
Like the Haldenwang connection and the unpublished report?
it sparked a massive debate about the timing, the justification, and critically, what it will actually do. Will it curb the AfD or could it backfire?
Affecting their popularity, the political climate, everything.
Exactly. And this whole situation really leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty challenging thought to mull over.
It does. Because if the past is anything to go by,
Right, here's the thing that's really tricky. If previous classifications, more intense observation, seem to have actually coincided with the AfD growing stronger in places like Thuringia, what else is there? What are the alternative ways to genuinely tackle the concerns about their ideology and their influence?
yeah, ways that don't just feed into their us versus them narrative, that don't risk making them seem like victims and potentially polarize things even further.
It's a genuinely tough question, isn't it? What strategies might actually work without those unintended consequences? Definitely something complex to think about.